Meet Europe in person.
Meet Europe in person.
Welcome to the Spinelli Group and European Federalists podcast series. Hello and welcome to the Spinelli Group podcast. This episode is focusing on the protection of the rule of law in the European Union. And we are very much looking forward to the expertise of former Spinelli Group president and member of the European Parliament, Daniel Freund. Thank you for being here with us.
Hey.
Mr. Freund, you studied politics, economy and law in Germany and public affairs in Paris. And when you came to Brussels, you first worked for an MEP and then changed in 2014 to work for the NGO Transparency International, where you have been responsible for fighting against corruption within EU institutions until 2019. Now you're a member of the European Parliament, where you are on the Committee on Constitutional Affairs and Budget Control, on both committees. You have been on the executive board of the Conference on the Future of Europe, and you started an intergroup on fighting corruption within the EU. In your political work, we can see that you focus on corruption and transparency. Question number one, the rule of law is one of the very basic pillars of the EU. What is your assessment on its principal strengths within the European Union, but also on the actual challenges these days for the rule of law?
Well, I fear that we have a rule of law crisis in the European Union, where a number of member states are questioning rulings of the European Court of Justice. They're questioning parts of the EU treaties. They're not applying parts of EU law. It's a crisis that has been spreading over the past few years. There have been so-called Article 7 procedures, so for violation of the fundamental values of the Union, against Poland and Hungary for years, 4 or 5 years now in both cases. And so far, the EU has struggled in a way to find adequate replies to those attacks on our most fundamental values and on the rule of law. Just last week, for the very first time, we are now using a new tool where I was one of the members of parliament that negotiated this new so-called conditionality mechanism that allows us now to freeze EU funds if member states don't have a working rule of law, if corruption gets too much out of hand. So in the case of Hungary now, for the very first time, we have frozen money. This doesn't mean, unfortunately, quite yet that the rule of law crisis is over. It's certainly something that is going to follow us around in years to come. And it is one of the existential crises of the European Union that we need to do more about.
As a politician, you fight especially against the corruption on the European level. Could you explain what exactly you are fighting against and for, and what changes need to be made to prevent also cases as we saw happening within the European Parliament?
I think there's two kinds or two aspects to this fight. One, of course, is to make sure that EU money is not being stolen, right? The European Union next year is going to spend 186 billion euros all across the Union for agriculture, for structural funds, to bring renewable energies or fast internet to all corners of the Union. And we, of course, want to make sure that this money actually goes where it's supposed to go and isn't stolen. And we have cases like Hungary, where the immediate family and friends of Viktor Orban are becoming millionaires, if not billionaires, by stealing this money. So that's something we want to prevent by making sure that there's good authorities fighting corruption, that we have enough personnel, enough money, enough resources to fight corruption, and good rules in place. The second thing is, of course, that the EU institutions, that the Parliament, Commission, Council here in Brussels, are actually free of corruption. And also just last week, we have probably the biggest corruption scandal we've ever had in the European Parliament history erupt. Vice President of Parliament arrested and now under investigation because hundreds of thousands of euros in cash were confiscated. So obviously we need to make sure that the political decisions we take in the Parliament, but also in all the EU institutions, that they cannot be bought. It cannot be bought by companies, cannot be bought by third countries. That, you know, what should count in a democracy is the best argument. you know, that we we vote on whoever has the best proposal. That should be the policy or the answer of the European Union, and not just who is the dictator with most cash at hand that can buy whatever visa liberalization or access for airlines or whatever it might be. We need to make sure that the democratic decisions here reflect the will of the people, reflect the best argument, and not just whoever has most money.
What concrete changes would it need in the law of the European Union, or what kind of mechanisms for control should there be installed, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, one thing is that, I mean, particularly the European Parliament is already very transparent. You know, any word I ever say in committee or in plenary, you can find online. Any vote I ever take, most of our votes are by roll call. You can find online how I have voted. You can also find on the website of the European Parliament any lobbyist I've ever met since I'm a member of the European Parliament. And most of my colleagues publish their meetings with lobbyists, but unfortunately not all of them. And one of the biggest weaknesses we have in the EU is we have relatively good rules on paper, but in reality, they're not always applied. And that is because the institutions basically self-police. The Parliament President is in charge of the rules here in the Parliament. The Commission is in charge of checking on the commissioners. And I think we need independent checks. We need an independent body that makes sure that those rules are followed. Then there's also, of course, a number of things that we need to fix. When I meet a lobbyist from Apple, IKEA, or Volkswagen, I have to declare that. But so far, third countries like Qatar are exempt from all the transparency rules. That obviously need to change. They need to go on the lobby register, and the meetings need to be declared. One change that I suggested last week and that got a broad majority in the European Parliament is that members of Parliament should declare their assets. Once when they come in, once they go out. Lots of colleagues here have said, if you want to take a bribe, no transparency rule is going to prevent some members from accepting bags of cash. But asset declarations, what they do, if you have to declare, the houses or apartments you own, the cars, art, or any big valuables, it makes it much harder to actually spend stolen or illegal or bribery funds. Because if you take 600,000 euros in cash, what are you going to do with it? You want to buy a house on the French Riviera, or you want to buy a sports car, or I don't know what people want to do with that kind of money. But then if you have to declare your assets at the end, you also have to explain where did the money come from. And if you didn't buy it from your salary as an MEP, then you get caught, and you cannot take these kind of bribes. So I think that would be a very good addition to our current rules.
In my head, I have now the suitcases full of cash that are buried for 10 years in some Brussels park until the MEP comes back. Anyway, let's get back to serious questions. The Spinelli Group actually is a network of federalist-minded politicians in the European Parliament and consists of over 70 MEPs coming from different political backgrounds. Alterio Spinelli was also the founder of the Union of European Federalists. Both groups call out to politicians as well as to European citizens to fight, for example, nationalism, to speed up the process of European integration, and to promote, of course, a federal Europe. Core aims of the Spinelli Group are to strengthen the European Union and to foster its democratization. So, from your point of view, where does the Spinelli Group stand when it comes to the rule of law, and what improvements is the group especially working on and for?
So obviously, if you want the European Union to work, you need the rule of law, because what is the European Union at the end of the day? It's some treaties and some laws, and that working together in Europe on solving the big issues of our time, be it climate change, be it that large companies pay their taxes, be it defending our values and our interests in a world where dictators like Vladimir Putin invade neighboring countries of the EU. We need to work together, and that working together can only work if we accept that things that we decide together through a democratic process, we also all abide by that afterwards. And if ever there is a dispute, if two countries or if anyone really disagrees with one of the laws that we have made or how it's applied, well, we have all agreed that there is one court, the European Court of Justice, that sorts out these disputes. So that is why an attack on the rule of law is ultimately an attack on the very principle of the European Union and puts into question all those laws and all those treaties that we have all agreed on. So I think in the Spinelli Group, we all share the ambition to strengthen the rule of law, to make sure that there's independent justice systems in all member states. And one of the things that we have repeatedly discussed in the last few years is the so-called Article 7, which is the procedure foreseen in the treaties to protect the rule of law, our fundamental values in the European Union. The biggest problem with Article 7 so far, and as I mentioned, 2 member states are currently under an Article 7 procedure, Poland and Hungary, but they have also mutually assured protection to each other for many years. And to actually sanction a member state under Article 7, you need the unanimity of all the other 26 member states. So as soon as there's 2 that say we'll veto everything, basically the biggest tool to protect the European Union breaks down and doesn't work anymore. And we have seen that with the 2 procedures against Poland and Hungary for many years now, because nothing happens. Although everyone sees, the rampant corruption in Hungary, although everyone sees the attacks on the independent judiciary in Poland, nothing happens. And I think Article 7 is one of the things that really needs to be reformed. And that's something that we have discussed in the Spinelli Group.
Could you give us some concrete examples? What kind of reforms you would propose?
Well, we don't have the exact text yet. We are in the European Parliament, anyways, now working on a broader report with our treaty change proposals on behalf of a broad majority in the European Parliament. The discussions on Article 7 are still ongoing for the moment. There is 2, let's say, basic ideas, and it might end up being that we go for both. Because one idea is obviously, the problem right now is the unanimity. So why don't we move to qualified majority that makes it easier that a procedure can indeed be triggered. The second element of it is what exactly should be the role for the European Court of Justice, because there is members of parliament that very much say, we should take the assessment whether rule of law is functioning in any one member state. Maybe that isn't an assessment that should be done by politicians, that shouldn't be done by, the governments in the council, but rather should be left to the analysis of the European Court of Justice to determine whether the rule of law in each member state is still functioning. So that's a bit the 2 elements where the debate is going at the moment, and it might well be that we end up, doing both, where we reduce the necessary majorities, but we also give a stronger role at the end of the procedure. And if politically we're deadlocked, that the European Court of Justice can uphold the rule of law everywhere.
Very interesting. About also talking about the roles of the different institutions when it comes to protect the rule of law in the EU. So I would like to pose the next question towards the role of the civil society. You have been an observer at the executive board on the Conference of the Future of Europe. How important is the inclusion and participation of the civil society to strengthen democracy, to strengthen rule of law within the EU? Let's talk, for example, about the civil society in Poland and Hungary, how to reach them and how to strengthen it, the systems from within.
Well, I think that civil society is an absolutely essential part of any healthy democracy. You only ever have a limited number of people in a parliament. It's 705 for the European Parliament. So they cannot know everything. They cannot know the specific situation on all things in all member states. So we need civil society to bring the necessary expertise to bring the information to us so that we can take well-informed decisions, so that we can vote the right laws and take the right decisions in the European Parliament. For all that, we need healthy and free civil society that is able to do its work. We have unfortunately seen that in some member states, civil society is attacked, is put under pressure, gets their funding taken away, or gets otherwise harassed to not be able to do their work. And particularly those NGOs fighting for rule of law, fighting against corruption, fighting for fundamental rights, we see are often the first ones that get under pressure. And obviously they are also the early warning system that tell us about what is going on the ground, people that get their rights trampled, that tell us which minorities, which sexual minorities are being put under pressure and what that means for them. So absolutely essential to be in close contact. I mean, I myself was a member of civil society before I became a member of parliament. And I think, that close exchange is absolutely vital to do a good job as a member of parliament. So I keep very close networks with NGOs all across Europe, and particularly, of course, since I work a lot on corruption, on the rule of law with NGOs in Poland and Hungary, that give me, their point of view when I see what the Hungarian government is saying, and look, we have done all these wonderful reforms, and we think now that all the EU funds should be released again. Then I turn to journalists, I talk to civil society. I also talk to the opposition, of course, to get the full picture. You can't just listen to the government. You need to get the full picture and the full assessment, whether the necessary reforms are being done and whether it actually works. And for that, civil society, absolutely crucial.
Is there a plan actually to follow up the conference on the future of Europe, to follow up such procedures, to involve citizens directly into decision-making processes, for example, of the Commission or the Parliament?
So there already was now in the beginning of December a first follow-up event where many of the citizens that had participated in the conference came back, and we talked about what has happened since the 9th of May, since the conclusions of the conference were published. I very much support that we keep on doing that we keep on monitoring whether all those good proposals that the citizens, but also politicians from all across Europe developed during the conference, that they don't just remain declarations, that they don't just go to the European House of History, but that we actually make them reality. And we also see that the Commission has started this type of citizen participation that we, for the first time used at that scale in the conference, that we keep on doing that. And they have had a first citizen dialogue now on avoiding food waste. So I'm glad to see that we're keeping on improving European democracy with these kind of tools. I mean, obviously, civil society at the European level has long been systematically included in the discussions, in the procedure of developing new laws. But I think we're not at the end of the road there. There's more that we can do to involve citizens, to involve organized civil society in the drafting and the decision process on EU laws, so that we make sure, the things we decide here in Brussels, they have very real impact on 450 million Europeans out there. So we need to make sure that what we decide here works for all Europeans, and that we limit as best as we can, collateral damage that sometimes some decisions we take here might have. And for that, the dialogue is absolutely essential and can be further strengthened.
I would like to address your personal approach. What is actually your personal main goal as an MEP and a member of the Spinelli Group when it comes to protection of the rule of law in the EU?
Well, I'm a convinced European. I went on the Erasmus exchange. I met my Italian wife on Erasmus in Paris. So all my work here in the Parliament aims, that this incredible project that gives us so many freedoms, that gives us peace, that gives us prosperity, that we strengthen that we strengthen working together on the big problems of our time. But these common solutions, they only really work if we then also all stick to them. So rule of law is absolutely crucial. And, if I want more European solutions, if I want that we spend more money together rather than 27 spending even more money on 27 individual solutions. But if we spend more money together as Europeans, then we also need to make sure that it's well spent, that it isn't being stolen, that it doesn't end up in the pockets of corrupt individuals. So that is what I fight for: having a functioning rule of law, having good measures against corruption at all levels, so that the European Union can function properly, and that people also trust, that it is working properly. That's what I work on.
Trust, the main ingredients for democracy, for a working democracy. Last words, what is your main message to the listeners of this episode of the Spinelli Group podcast series?
Well, defending the rule of law, defending democracy ultimately is a job for all of us. You can't just leave that to a few politicians in Brussels or elsewhere. We all need to speak up when certain people, certain parties, certain movements attack our common European house, our common rule of law. So that's something that we all have to work on, because democracy is not forever. Rule of law is not God-given and eternal. It needs to be protected every day. So that's a job for all of us.
Thank you so much, and all the best for your work.
Thank you. Bye.